Now, we specifically chose this old refrigerated delivery van and spent 8 weeks purpose building it to take on the challenge of taking it to the frozen north in the depths of winter.
Now, we thought we'd prepared as much as we could. What's going on here then, boy?
Bit of frozen pipe action.
Frozen pipe action. But some things you just have to experience to understand.
Looks like the old chains are going on. It was a good job of practicing this a few times.
So it's fair to say we learned a fair bit on our first trip. And that's why we spent the last 2 weeks making upgrades to the van. And this week we're going to make the last of the modifications before we load her on the ship and send her off to Canada.
So first up, the big boys' toys. Now, whilst I'd love to fit a winch to every vehicle, because let's have it right, they look really cool, don't they? On this vehicle, I never really thought I'd see the need in it because it's a two-wheel drive, we're never going to take it off-road, so what's the point? But that was until this happened.
As you can see, we are well and truly beached.
Now, that was our friends Jess and Alex, who were also up in the Arctic when we were there last winter, and they were in Sweden at the time, and they were visiting some friends, but they got caught in a little snowdrift which pulled them off the road. Now, it wasn't too bad because they were just round the corner from their friend's house, and he had a four-wheel drive, so obviously that would be able to pull them out. Well, apparently not, but it didn't matter because they had a friend who had a big old tractor, which obviously that's going to pull them out. Now, unbelievably, that couldn't even do the job. And I think it was because the snow was so compacted, they were just wheel spinning all the time. So the farmer did notice that Alex had a winch on the front of this vehicle. So they got that out. 2 seconds later, that was pulling him out of the ditch. Now, to be fair to Alex, he didn't try that in the first place because, first of all, he was round the corner from his mate's house, so it's a lot easier to just get a strap and pull you out, isn't it? But more importantly, there was only real baby trees to pull to, and he just assumed that if he tried to go to that, he'd just snap the tree. But ever since then, I decided if we ever did an Arctic trip again, the winch was one of the first things that was going on. Now, normally when you see these winches, they go on the front bumper here, but the only problem with that is the brackets that are vehicle specific that mount to the chassis to hold them up are really expensive. Then you've also got to chop the front bumper apart or get the whole jobby where the winch is all mounted in the front bumper, but they can be like £3,000 or £4,000 sometimes. Well, you know how much we love a bargain, and on the Sainsbury's van, there's a perfect alternative place for it. And that is at the back here. Now, this is where the drop-down steps were for the old Sainsbury's box, but obviously we've got rid of them. But there's mounting holes already, and that is for a tow bar if you wanted to fit them. So I know this point of the chassis is strong enough to take the winch. If I'm honest, it's probably one of the strongest points on the chassis. Now, if you're thinking about winches on the rear, a lot of good off-roading rigs normally have one on the front and rear because they reckon one of the best ways to winch is back out the same way you came. Now, the reason this is going to be an absolute bargain is because the winch I got off of eBay was brand new but second-hand, if you know what I mean. So that was 250 quid, and I know it's not the best brand out there, but it's going to do the job, and hopefully we won't have to use it anyway. And then this is a generic bracket for winches. It was 50 quid off of eBay, and all I've got to do is adapt it slightly, and it should just bolt on straight on the back here.
So while John's getting on with that, I wanted to talk to you about another safety modification we're making to the vehicle. Because driving in the north in winter can be a bit testing at the best of times, let alone driving at night. And that's not just because of the reduced visibility and the changing road conditions, but mostly because of the threat from wildlife, causing accidents and also sadly dealing with roadkill. Now, growing up in rural Australia, that's something that I've been taught to take really seriously, and I hear that it's a similar situation in Canada. So we try to avoid driving at night whenever we can, but with so few daylight hours, it's just not possible to avoid that all the time. Would you believe that it's only 2 o'clock in the afternoon and it's this dark? It's just crazy, isn't it? Now, we already have these little lights that we added to the roof rack, and they do the job for us of improving our peripheral vision and lighting up the sides of the road for us. But what they don't do is give us any kind of distance. So for that job, we're going to add some of these big old nasty spotlights. Now, these are just some cheapies off of Amazon, and I know that you can spend a fortune on lights, but these are the ones that we used on the Defender, and we know they're going to do exactly the job that we're looking for. Now, then we had the trouble of figuring out where we were actually going to put them on the vehicle. And we figured out out that John could make us a nice little bracket for them to just go down here, which I know doesn't look the prettiest, but it is going to do the job.
Now, all I've done is I've welded 2 plates on the end and then obviously just drilled the holes in. So hopefully this will slot in nicely. Fits a treat. Now, remember a couple of weeks ago I had the old passenger seat off and I installed the isolator switch down there. Well, that's wired up to the battery and that is for the winch at the back. And the reason I've wired up to this battery under here rather than the main starter is because when the engine's running, it's charging both batteries. So I could winch all day long and it's not a problem. But for whatever reason, I had to not have the engine running. Well, I could flatten this battery if need be. At least I could still start the engine and charge both batteries up. So it's probably the safest way of doing it anyway. So I've run both battery cables all the way around down the back and I've got them sticking out the bottom there so I can wire that up when it's all done. So I've just got to finish the bracket on the back, cut the hole out for the winch, mount the number plate on the top. But the best thing is I've got that bracket made so I can get a couple of coats of paint on it now anyway. Now, we haven't seen you for a few days because we've been on with some boring admin jobs, but that's meant I can get a couple of coats on the old winch. So what do you think? Looks pretty good. Now, I think we need to address the elephant in the room because I sat down the other day and Jess said to me, let me cut your hair because I think we could do it really good. And I think...
You're such a liar!
I think I know what hairstyle will suit you really good, John.
You're going to look like such a muppet.
Make sure you do it good.
Well, how about you don't move?
I call it the Theo Von look myself.
I call it the half-wit fool look myself.
And I tell you what, when me in this haircut and Jess in her Nessa wig, it's a sight to behold, especially when we're naked. But anyways, back to the winch. It's all bolted up and all wired up, so it's all good to go. Now, the front cover is just to make it look good and to stop all the grit and grime getting on there, basically. But Jessie's going to make a cover to protect it as well. But all we got to do now is to test it out, and for that, we need a suitable vehicle with a heavy load. But I think I've got just the thing. Just the job.
You'll be on day. John! Oh my God. You're such a knob.
Get off!
You're going to stop the thing. Stop! Now, our money-saving tips aren't limited to haircuts and winches, but also on booking flights, because I went on to book our flights to go to Halifax the other day, £933 per person. But I worked my magic and I got that down to £722 per person, which works out at a £422 saving. The infuriating thing about booking flights is that the prices change based on things like your location and browsing history. And that's where the sponsor of this week's video, Surfshark, makes the magic happen. So first of all, I went on Skyscanner with Surfshark turned off, and the cheapest direct flight came back at £933. I then cleared my browsing history and used Surfshark to change my virtual location to Toronto, which came back with 1,268 Canadian dollars, which works out at £722 and a £211 saving per person. Then I tried setting my location as Perth, and that came back at a whopping 2,606 Aussie dollars or £1,350. Now what's nuts about this is if I had booked the exact same flight on the same website back home, it would have cost us £1,266 more for the exact same thing. So Surfshark is a virtual private network and it allows us to change our virtual location, and it keeps us safe online by encrypting all the information that's sent between our device and the internet. So not only does it help us to get cheaper flights, but it will keep us safe when we use the airport Wi-Fi too. They've got a special deal on for the holidays at the minute too. So if you head over to surfshark.com/trueblue, you'll get an extra 4 months for free of Surfshark at an unbeatable price.
Well, the lights are on, and I have to admit, I'm not the biggest fan of how they look, but they're going to do the job. So I'll drop a clip in now of what they look like later on up in the dark. And I know you can get brackets for the front of the grille, on the bonnet, you can get nudge bars and everything like that, but they all cost money, whereas this was just the original brackets welded to a bit of angle on the front, and it will do the job anyway.
Now my next bunch of modifications and bits and bobs is to help combat every van lifer's nemesis, condensation. And that becomes even more of a problem when you go to the extreme cold because it turns into ice. So last time we went, we had a couple of things that we did. First, we had some vents up in this skylight, which obviously let air in all the time, particularly when we were driving. And when we cooked, we put our exhaust fan on that obviously we also use for the bathroom. And it got so cold, we actually got some really great footage of showing you how that works. The other main thing that I did was I bought some of these little non-electrical dehumidifiers. I did my research, they're supposed to be the best ones, but it was still a bit too much for them to handle. Now I know that the best thing you can do for condensation is improve your ventilation, but when you go into these crazy cold temperatures, there's a limit to how much freezing air you want to let into your vehicle. That's why we need to look for some other solutions. So the first one is this little 240 volt dehumidifier that we bought. I've gone for this one because it's really lightweight, tiny wee little thing, and it uses 60 watts. Now this is one of the reasons we've increased our battery power, but I've been testing it out in the house and I can't believe how much water it pulls out and the difference it makes. So it's just going to sit down under this table on a little ledge and we'll have her on all the time. Another thing that unfortunately we can only try and improve but can't actually fix, because we made a big old mistake when we built this vehicle, is to try and reduce the impact of thermal bridging. Now, we didn't actually know about this until we built this vehicle and you guys alerted us to it. But if you don't know what thermal bridging is, it's where you've got a conductive material, so like metal, and you've got different temperatures either side. So in our instance, it's freezing cold outside and warm inside. And so what that does is on your conductive material, so say your bolt that goes through your door, you get a cold surface that then condensates, and in our case, when we go the crazy cold, it freezes. So there's only a few things that we can actually do to reduce this, because like I say, big old mistake in the building process. The first is that we put this foam strip around the door frame when we went to the Arctic last time, and that did help to improve the situation. We do still get ice that forms in here, unfortunately. But we also had an issue with these bolts. So John's just 3D printed some plastic covers for them, which should hopefully stop the hot air hitting them and them icing over quite so badly. Next little addition is a 12 volt fan. Now the reason we want this is to try and get rid of any stagnant air pockets that we get around the vehicle, because that's where your condensation is the worst. And we've gone with this one because it spins at 180 degrees and you can lock it in place, but also it goes like up and down, and you can flip it round so you can get it to exhaust or bring air in, so we can direct the air anywhere we want it to go. And then for my last little one, I wanted to show you these natty little pot lids that I found on Amazon the other day. Because obviously by putting a lid on your pots when you're cooking, there's a lot less steam and moisture going into the air. But the reason I wanted to show you is because these have got like a stepped silicone edge on them, which means that I only need one lid to fit my two big pots, which is obviously brilliant for space saving in the van. So we're hoping that with all these little changes we've made, we're going to get a little bit less icicle action inside.
So now hopefully that'll sort all our condensation issues, but we need to get on with all our heating mods. Now on the back here you should be a Santa-Clad board, but I've removed it for a couple of different reasons. First is obviously we need to get the power into the fan, but second, we've got a hole at the bottom for this night heater vent, which I can open and close. Now the only problem is I didn't notice it when we were fitting it, but it's got holes in the top here. So when we closed it up, the heat was getting out like that and then it buckled the board. So we need to put a new board on and seal this up. And then second, we're going to duct the night heater pipes from the night heater into the garage. Now we didn't do this first time because we installed some temperature control fans that are in them vents down there. So when it got below a certain temperature in the garage, they'd switch on and suck all the warm air from the cab into the garage to keep it warm. And it worked brilliantly until we got down to -25 and then we had one of the pipes freeze. So where we're going, we might get down to them temperatures, if not colder. So all I'm going to do is tee into this system down here. I've made a slightly taller box here so the pipe will run over the water lines under there as well, which will keep it warmer. And then I've just drilled a hole in the back here, so it'll just go in there and piped into the garage. Now to secure this pipe at the back of the garage here, I've been on with a bit more 3D printing because we printed up this little right angle bracket. So the vent just slots through the hole like that, screw it to the bracket, and then the bracket pops onto that pipe, and then I'm going to screw it to the wall. So hopefully we'll have no more frozen pipe action. Now we haven't seen Jess for a while. Wonder what she's up to.
So we can't book our flights until we have put the van on the boat, and then once the van's on the boat.
Oh, look who it is, look.
There is a time difference to Australia.
Now, because it's Christmas time, all she's doing is talking to her mates on the phone.
All I'm doing.
And not only that, she's going to see them as well. How many mates did you go see last week?
3. I saw 3 friends. It was great.
But the only thing is because we haven't got kids, and obviously it's sort of that time in life where everybody is having kids, she comes home and she tells me all the stories of like her mates' conversations, doesn't she, about like Jack starting to walk and whatever kids do, you know what I mean? And our lives just aren't quite the same anymore, are they? It's a bit
Maybe
shame.
for you. For me, I have to care for a giant overgrown child.
Whereas like our conversations are a bit more like, what swinger party we're going to go to next, aren't they?
In his wildest dreams.
In fact, I've got one for you.
Oh, God help me.
You've got to say this word after what I say. So the word is addicted.
Addicted?
Yeah.
This is never going to go well.
Talking on the phone.
Addicted.
Eating food.
Addicted.
Sleeping.
Addicted.
What hit you on the chin this morning?
I am not falling for that one. Oh my God.
Now I've been told that if you do a circle like this, then when you push the board on, it creates like a suction, like a vacuum in the middle of the hole, which sucks it to the wall. I've never done it before, but we'll give it a go.
Well, what's the verdict? How do we rate the new adhesive application method?
The verdict is, this is take 2, because somebody forgot to put the microphone on when we were installing it. Who forgot to do that, Jess? Say the word again.
Oh, addicted!
No, Jess did.
So that should be the bathroom finished for now. John just 3D printed up a little spacer that he put on the back of that night heater vent and then sealed that up. So hopefully we won't get any leakage out the back and the boards won't warp this time. But I am now finally onto the last job inside the vehicle. And that is that I'm going to sew myself a little shoe rack to go in this wasted space here. Now, I see my sewing a little bit like John's 3D printing in that if you can buy it off the shelf, it's usually cheaper, quicker and easier. But where it really is worth its weight in gold is when you want to customize something. Now I just use the same material for all these kind of jobs, and it's this black synthetic ripstop canvas. Now I love it because it's waterproof. If it gets mucky, you can just wipe it down with a cloth. The only negative thing I will say about it is it does fade if you leave it exposed to the sun like it did on my gas bottle covers on the Landy, but it's quite cheap as well. So it's only £45 for 5 metres of it. And this is what I've got left over after I sewed the cutlery holder that I made for the Landy, the high lift jack boot mount, and my gas covers and loads of pockets and bits and bobs. So it goes a long old way, and you can just put it straight through your normal household sewing machine. And then for my edging, I just use these leftover ratchet straps because they're always way too long, aren't they? It's a good bit of recycling, but mostly I know it's nice and strong. So when I want to fix it in, I know I can put screws through it or pop rivets or whatever, and it will do the job. Well, I'm absolutely stoked with how this has come out. I decided to do it with 2 big pockets rather than individual ones because it just makes the space so much more flexible. I could put big hiking boots in there or maybe not even use it for shoes at all. And then to secure it on, we've just used some washers and normal wood screws that we've put through the webbing on the sides. So that is going nowhere. So if you've got any dead spaces in your vehicle, I can't recommend doing this enough. And if you do, and you bust out that old sewing machine, please do send us some pictures on Facebook or Instagram because I love to see your guys' projects and I like to steal your ideas too.
Now the next thing I want to talk to you about is a bit of a controversial one, and that is tyres. Now we did loads of research before our last trip, but we learnt the most when we was on the trip. And because of what we learnt, we're going to do something slightly different this time. Now in certain places at certain times of year you need winter rated tyres. Now to know if your tyres are winter rated, there's a little 3-peak mounting on it with a snowflake in the middle. Now these aren't actually winter tyres as such, they're all-terrain tyres. And I know winter tyres are better in the snow and ice, but we're going to go from like -50 to +40 through all different terrains. So the all-terrains are going to be best for us on this trip. Now, these are absolutely phenomenal on the snow. But where they're not so good is on ice. And that's where these snow chains come in. Now, same again, for certain roads at a certain time of the year, by law, you have to have these on your vehicle, and they're absolutely brilliant. We used them once on our trip in Norway, and if it wasn't for these, we would have been scuppered because we slid back down an icy hill and we were just sat there wheel spinning. We stuck these on and away we went. Now, whilst they are brilliant, they're an absolute pain to get on. So if you do get a set, make sure you practice putting them on a few times. But also, they'll get you moving, but you can't really go fast in them, and you can't go far in them either. Now, this is where studded tyres come in, and they're absolutely brilliant because you can drive with them in any road condition and at any speed as well. So you can go from snow to ice to normal paved roads, and they're perfectly fine. But the only problem with them is certain countries don't let you have them at all. Other countries will only let you have them in certain areas and at certain times of the year too, which means you need 2 sets of tyres. So for us, it's just not an option. So that's why for this trip, we got these little beauties. Now, there's 160 screw-in removable studs in this bag, which is the equivalent to having 4 studded tyres. Now, we paid about 120 quid for these, but what I love about them is that the company said if we don't use them on the trip, they'll buy them back off us for minus 15 or 20%. So love that they're doing that. Now, part of the kit, you get the actual tool that you install them with, which obviously just goes in your drill, and then that slots in there like that into the stud, and then you just screw it in until it's flush with the top there, so that part of the spike is sticking out. Now, even if you were to use them through paved roads and they wear right down, the design of them still means you can get the stud out at the end, and it doesn't affect your tyre at all when you remove them. There's 40 studs going to go in each tyre, and they're pretty easy to fit because you just screw them in at the bottom. You either drive your vehicle forward or just jack the wheel up, spin them and put all the studs in. Now, the reason there's 40 in each tyre is because then you're always going to have at least a few spikes in the ice at all times.
Now, the only thing about having these studs is we're not sure when to actually install them because we've got some crazy distances to cover going all the way across Canada, and most of that is going to be on cleared highways where they'll be of no benefit to us and it will just wear them down. So I think we're going to have to just play it by ear and put them in when we get to a place where we feel like we need them. But I'm so reassured just having them with us because it means we can go and explore and see all the places we want to. We don't have to worry about avoiding areas like coastal areas that are more likely to thaw. We can travel where we want, when we want, and we know we're going to be safe.
Well, it's crazy to think that in a week's time, this old girl will be setting sail on the ship to Canada.
Honestly, you could pinch me. It does not feel real. And like on our first date, we talked about like dream travel plans, and a proper lottery, like pie in the sky dream for me was to go to Canada and the US in a camper. And I just can't believe it's happening.
Yeah, well, I think that's most people's on their bucket list, isn't it, to do that. And to go and hire an RV and do Canada and especially all the states in America, yeah, it's just unbelievable. So the fact that we're doing it in Sainsbury's van is even better, I think.
And one that we built ourselves as well. It's just unbelievable. So fingers and toes crossed, we've got everything off the list, we've dotted all the I's, we've crossed all the T's, and this time next week she'll be sailing off into the sunset. So look,
sunset? The frost set?
Yeah, frost
the
icebergs. Let's hope we don't have a Titanic situation. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next week, and don't forget about that Surfshark link in the description.
You'd be straight off that plank as well.
What, you just dump me in the sea?
Definitely.